you. Yeah, great songs. I stand amazed in the presence of Jesus. And then the second one I'll refer to later, but that stand amazed in the presence of Jesus. That concept that you can be in the presence of Jesus, and he could turn up. And that's really what all this business in Rome, in chapters 1 to 5 of Romans, we were thinking, what's wrong with us and how can God make us right? Because we can't make ourselves right, we can't fix ourselves. So how can we be right with God? And Jesus does that. So that's all that. And now in chapter 6 to 8, it's getting down to like, so how can we be right with God? And up to chapter 5, really, and then from chapter 6 of Romans, how can we live right with God? How do we live right? It was one thing to be right, and Jesus has done that, and we thought about how his death achieves that, forgives our sin, makes us right with God, nothing that we contribute to that. We've been through all that. And now it's like saying, so now, how do we live right with God, given that we are right with God? And deep in where we are with this is this difference between theory, instructions, a description of what's the right way to live, and then having that reality, having it as a reality. No, it's like the instructions, because we're going to be into the law of God, and we've thought a lot about this law of God, that for this period of like 1,500 years, given to Moses down to the death, resurrection, ascension of Jesus, there's this sort of system of like a multimedia presentation of what's wrong with human beings and what's the answer. What's Jesus like, and what's he going to do, and what's the right way to live, and all that. But that was just a description of it. That was only ever a description. And so it's that thing like, there's the theory, but the theory of it doesn't save us. Only Jesus can save us. And it's that big difference then between having a description of the right way to live outside us, and then having the reality of the right way to live on the inside. And that's why that idea, so that's what we're going to be looking at. How do we live? And is in this whole issue that we looked at in chapter 6, that unless we have that, unless we died to the old life and been born into this new life, we'll never really want to. We'll go, I like the idea of that new life. Sounds great. Yeah, I'll try hard to achieve it. But you won't, and you'll actually always what you really want to do is keep going back to that old life and the old desires and things like that. You won't ever really be able to enjoy that new thing. And that line that was there, it's only in your will that I'm free. It's like the sort of thing you can only really say, only when I'm doing what you tell me to do am I free. That sounds outrageous, offensive, oppressive, really, unless we really know him. And then you go, because if you said that to someone, only when you're doing exactly what Jesus tells you to do, only then you're free. The person's like, that's, are you a psycho? What's the matter with you? Where's your own personality? Do your own thing. It's like, no, but if you met him, you'd know why we say that. Because you go, but if you know him and he gets you, all of you, he gets you like nobody else does. And when he tells you this is the right way, you're like, of course. And even if I'm like, I don't want to do that, I don't want to live that way, and we're going to understand why we're like that even after we're Christians. We're still like, yeah, but he knows best. I trust him. I love him. And just when we sang that song, I stand amazed in the presence of Jesus. It just reminds us that this is not a theoretical discussion. He is alive. And we're not just talking about, here's the idea of God. And like everyone else might talk about the idea of God, but we don't, because he's alive. He could roll up right now. He could roll up by the power of the Spirit, and we'd know that. And we'd be like, the building could shake if he arrived, and we'd know it, kind of thing. That's a genuine possibility. Because for us, it's like, oh no, it's not the idea of God. Who cares about that? I don't believe. When sometimes people say, do you believe in God? I'm like, I don't know. Really. No, probably not. I believe, but Jesus, oh yeah, he's real. But, this idea of God, I can't be bothered with that. That's a load of rubbish. But this real living Lord who is Jesus, yeah. There was, just reminded me that there was a contemporary of Billy Graham, right contemporary of him, and they kind of had gone even into Bible college together. And Billy Graham had sort of committed himself to the Bible. But this other chap didn't, and he'd sort of gone into a kind of more like an academic approach to things and lost his faith entirely, and he lived his life basically as an atheist. And then late in life, not long before he died, someone said to him, what, do you have any regrets about all this? And after he talked about his kind of, atheism stuff, he actually stopped and was silent and then said, I miss Jesus. I miss Jesus. And it's like he knew Jesus was real. But all that atheism, it's like, yeah, whatever. But I miss Jesus. That's awesome, isn't it? He's real. This living God's real. I stand amazed in the presence of Jesus. And we could really say that. It's can happen, and you'll know if you're a real believer. You'll know what something of that's like, where you know you've been in the presence of Jesus by the Spirit. And so, some of you know I love Psalm 95. We say it every day, don't we, in the Church of England, and how today, if you hear his voice, don't harden your heart, as you did at Massah and Meribah. What's that? I wasn't at Massah and Meribah. That's happened 3,500 years ago in the Middle East. Nothing to do with me. It's that's the thing with the Bible. It's so real, it's so alive that when you're reading these stories, and it's there's people who didn't trust Jesus in the desert, and he was with them, and they didn't trust him, and they didn't want him, and they're just I'll have cucumbers back in Egypt rather than him. And the thing is, when you read that story, because of the reality of all this, you can feel, man, yeah, I'm like that. I've wanted cucumbers in Egypt. And people are like, what are you talking about? Whereas the Christians who read the Bible go, yeah, me too. Me too. Because it's like a reality, all of this stuff. It's not just ancient history. It's totally real. And that sense that Jesus, the Jesus who spoke to them, is the same one who says to us, am I not enough for you? And then we actually we'll say things like, have you been to the cross? What are you talking about? I haven't been to the Middle East. It's not even there anyway, We know, we're nah, we know what that means. Have you been to Jesus as he's hanging on the cross? Were you there when they crucified my Lord? And we have to be able to go, yeah, everyone has to. Because if they haven't, and that's this point, we've got to have the old humanity crucified. Were you there? I've got to have been there. So all this, why are we talking about that? All this stuff. It's because this stuff in Romans, when he's talking about how we're going to live, why these chapters are so deep. And some of the things, if we'll be able to get in, some of this stuff sounds quite complicated in from Romans 7. And sounds quite complicated. What's he on about? It's good to just have this sense that it's this contrast between a theory outside us and outside a person who doesn't, like, think about a person who doesn't believe it, has never met Jesus, has not had that death to the old life, risen to the new life, hasn't got that new heart, and they're sort of listening to this, like a description of how we ought to be, of the life of God. And they might go, that's great, yeah, I see that, but on the other hand, I feel condemned because I'm not that. And there is no life there. There's no possibility of that life because that's only a description of it. And they themselves are just this, what we naturally are, this old human life that's enslaved to desires, and it's going nowhere. We've seen that in Romans. This sense we can't fix it. No matter what we do, it's the same old, selfish, dying humanity. There's that. And then Paul says, yeah, but if you've died and risen with Christ, and there's this new life that's from within, then how do we live then? It's something that comes out of us. It's not that we're trying to force it in. It's not an oppressive thing. We're like, we've got to try and force ourselves to do this. It's like, no, it's a natural thing that comes out of us rather than being forced into us. But I really wanted to capture that idea, though, that this is about a reality of Jesus. All this reality. And if when a person hasn't experienced that, and for them it's all just an idea, even an oppressive idea or something, that is how it looks if you haven't met Jesus. When I talk on lots of issues, sexuality issues and things, and I'll describe this idea of people being celibate single for Jesus, and all the kind of life that we live as Christians, and the way that Christians have done that for a long time. And I'll say, it sounds ridiculous, impossible, oppressive even, unless you've fallen in love with Jesus. If you've fallen in love with Jesus, all of this has a different character to it. You're like, the idea that there could be a love more fulfilling than anything any human relationship can give you. Oh, no, that's nonsense. It isn't nonsense. It isn't nonsense. It's very real for those who've met him. And they know that. They know that's available. Anyway, Romans chapter 7, here we go. Now listen, this is notoriously complicated chapter in a way. I say, well, it's not really, but people go, what is he talking about? Because at some points in it, he's talking as if he's two people. So I'm warning you up front, you'll be like, what is he on about? You will say that. I have when I've been prepping it anyway. But it's not so bad, honestly. When you actually, it makes it. By the end, I'm hoping you'll be like, oh yeah, that's all. Yeah, I get it. It's not that bad. So remember, we rushed through that little bit at the end of chapter 6, and I'll just remember, and it was just that thing where he's saying, can I just mention from chapter 6, verse 15, when he said, shall we sin because we're not under the law but under grace? So he's really saying, he's said, the law is not the answer to how we're going to live. And so someone might go, well, if the law isn't controlling us, again, we'll just sin then, because we've got no instruction manual telling us how. If there isn't an instruction manual that we can consult, what am I supposed to do? Should I nick stuff? Hang on. No, you're not supposed to nick stuff. It says so here. See, that's ridiculous. So he's saying, well, if we haven't got the law, are we just supposed to sin then? And he's like, no. Don't you get that nicking stuff's wrong, right? Don't you get that? See, that's really what he's dealing with there. Just because we don't have this instruction manual completely in control doesn't mean we don't actually know what's right and wrong. That's what the end of chapter 6 is about. And he says, actually, you're not supposed to ever really be serving anything other than God himself, this Lord God himself. That's where your instructions really come from. Like, we want the life of God within us. Anything less than that isn't good enough. So in chapter 7, do you not know, brothers and sisters, for I'm speaking to those who know the law, so he's now addressing this question about what about this description of the life of God and how to fix human beings and the description of Jesus, all that is that the law is. And, if you know, we've done quite a bit on what the law is in the first term of Romans Fest. So I'm going to assume that, at least that it's available if you want to go back and have a listen to some of that. Do you not know, brothers and sisters, so I'm speaking to those who know the law, that the law has authority over someone only as long as that person lives. Now, what he's going to do here is, do you remember, because one of the big issues in this, first century apostolic time is this business about how are we supposed to know how to live the Christian life? And especially, we've got all these international Christians, all these people from all over the world joining church, and they've never read the instruction book, right? They've never read any of that, so how are they going to know how to live? Now, there was a whole faction who were like, oh yeah, no, they're going to have to get stuck into the law. That's it. They need to be in that. That is that has to control them. So they need to get circumcised. That's like entry requirement. That's one of the basic things of the law. Get circumcised. And then all the stuff in the law, they need that. So they need to get into the law. The law is still in charge of church, right? And then if you remember, that's the big issue, isn't it? The big conflict in the New Testament, if you've read it, is about that. Because that sounds kind of reasonable at one level. You'll go, no, the law's still, Jesus has come, but surely the law is in charge of us. God, this instruction manual sort of thing, surely that's still in charge. And the apostles are like, oh, no, don't worry, you don't need, that was just a temporary thing. That isn't the real thing. Jesus has always been the real thing. Jesus is the real thing. He's your Lord and Master. That's never been the delivering on reality. That's never been the Lord and Master. It's always only ever been Jesus. And though for a time church was organized by that isn't the thing that people need. So when all these people from all over the world are joining church, we don't need to say, oh, why don't you go and study this which we did for a period of time, but it isn't the reality. It's like, no, what? No, don't bother with that. Just have the reality of Christ. You don't need that. Now, that's a hard thing, because we might say, oh, but, if it was helpful, why isn't it still helpful? Let's still organize people like that. But the apostles, and this is why this chapter and all this stuff is so sort of intense, because it's saying no, because you can't trust in anything really. You can't trust in anything other than Jesus to fix you. And if you think you have to have that to live right and be right, you're trusting that. That has never been able to fix you. Never. It's only ever been Jesus. And so what he's going to say now is, even if you wanted to carry on doing that law stuff, you actually can't, because of the death and resurrection of Jesus. You actually can't, even if you're like, well, I'm gonna. Well, you can't. You actually can't because of the death and resurrection of Jesus. So let me explain. Well, let him explain. No, I'm not going to. It's Paul can do it. Yeah. So he's really going to make the point, like, the law itself makes it clear it only operates up until death. And then after a person's dead, that's it. The law's not got reach beyond death. Even in the law itself, the law is like, no, only reach up to death. And then there's no reach beyond that. So let's see. For example, Romans 7 verse 2. By law, a married woman is bound to her husband as long as he is alive. But if her husband dies, she is released from the law that binds her to him. So then, if she has sexual relations with another man while her husband is still alive, she's called an adulteress. But if her husband dies, she's released from that law and is not an adulteress if she marries another man. Okay, it's straightforward. It's actually from Deuteronomy 24 about this sort of stuff, and it's just making a point, like saying, she's not still married to him after he's dead. That's the simple point. She's not still married to him after he's dead. She can marry someone else. The law says that. So you remember the Sadducees you remember there was a chat with Jesus where these guys who didn't believe there was any life after death at all, the Sadducees. They were like old style materialists, really. They're just like, nah, this stuff, it's only for this life. So they're like, well, say this woman's married to someone, that dude dies, then there's another one, that dude dies, another one, that dude dies. She gets through quite a few in that little story, actually. But it's a bit careless, actually. But so they're like, so who's she married to then? And of course, the law makes it. She's not actually married. Once they've died, that's it. She isn't actually married to any once they've died. That's the end of marriage. That she can and that's how she marries. So she's married to one. That one dies. She marries another one. That's all. The law's like, yeah, that's totally fine. You can do that because the marriage is ended by death. Marry another one, and then she gets through a whole batch. That's a whole nother story. But the point is, that's perfectly right according to the law for her to do that. As soon as once her husband dies, she's not married to him anymore. She can marry another one. So Paul's like, the law tells you it only operates up to the point of death and not beyond. Okay. So you're thinking, well, what's the point of that? That's a strange point. No, but he's got a reason for it. So, verse 4, my brothers and sisters, you also died to the law through the body of Christ, that you might belong to another, to him who was raised from the dead, in order that we might bear fruit for God. So, right? So stick with it. It's actually simple, isn't it? He's really saying, so it's like the law had this kind of relationship with natural human beings for a while. And then remember, we saw that Jesus kind of comes and takes on that old humanity of ours. He was born under the law, and he's like, yeah, I'll take on that life that you've got under the law. Let's use this word, married to the law of God. And then he dies. All right, he can marry. It's like marry someone else now. So it's like that old life that we had, that you could say, like married to that external instruction set. Well, if we're united to Jesus and we go through death with him, we're crucified with him, and we've been emphasizing this, haven't we? You've got to die. We've got to die with Jesus at the cross. He dies instead of us, when it comes to the anger of God and all of that, the punishment of God, the wrath of God, he dies instead of us, but we must die with him in terms of getting rid of our old life, and then we're raised with him in terms of getting a new life. So we die with him. So Paul's like saying, so look, if you really, do you remember what he told us last time? Think of yourselves as dead to that old life. You are dead to that old life. It's, as far as you're concerned, that life is finished, dead, over and done with. So he's like, if that's the case, that whole idea of an instruction manual that's outside you, trying to control you from outside, that relationship, that's dead now. He's like thinking of it as, imagine you were married to an instruction manual that's outside you, then you've died, and it's like, now you can marry someone else. Who are you going to marry? And it's like, well, marry Jesus. Now, this new life, married to Jesus. So were you looking to find out who's your partner or master, if it's the slave image, but this is a married image. So you're married to somebody. It's like, imagine that you're married to law. That old life is married to instructions that are outside you. That life dies, and now you're raised to a new life. This new life, who is that life going to be married to get direction? To find out where we're going, what life's all about. And it's like, well, he says here, let's read it again. So, my brothers and sisters, verse 4, you also died to the law through the body of Christ, that you might belong to another, so you can marry another, to him who was raised from the dead, in order that we might bear fruit for God. Now, the idea of you're married to Jesus, this raised to be married to him. At one level, you say, well, it's just a metaphor, isn't it? It's just a metaphor. It's just a nice way of thinking. No, it's not actually. It is real. Like, we really are designed to be married to the living God. And he's like saying, your old life is kind of married to trouble. It's a broken marriage. It's a messed up situation. You die, escape from that marriage that's all sin and condemnation and death and mess. That dies. Now, it's like he says, now let me marry you and bring you into a totally different kind of a relationship, a different kind of life. Marry you. So it is a metaphor, but it's more than that. And always remember that it's more than that. The whole Bible begins, Adam and Eve. There's this guy, and then out of his side he's split open. His side, isn't it? He goes into a death-like sleep, and his side is split open, and out of that side comes his wife. And then the Apostle Paul points out the blatantly obvious when he goes, that isn't about Adam and Eve, It is about Christ and the church. And we're like, yeah, obviously. But he does actually point it out. And it is, isn't it? It's like, because what a weird way to create a man and the woman. What a weird way. When you're reading the Bible, you're like, isn't that weird? Why is she created that way? Why does he have to be killed and split open and then she's pulled out of him? What's that about? Can't she just be made? And then the living God's like, nah, because this isn't about them. This is about the real meaning of the universe, what marriage really is about. Marriage really is, it's like marriage, whatever marriage we ever experience in this present life, it's only a temporary thing. It's only a pale shadow of the real thing that we're designed for. That, there's Christ on the cross and his side is pierced and we're like, he's the Adam and his side is pierced in his death, and then he's raised to new life, and we're raised with him to be married to him. Of our flesh, of our bone, he shares the very same life that we've got. All of that's going on in the Bible, and it's all heading into and so the Bible begins with that image of marriage, and it ends in the book of Revelation, of course, with the wedding feast of the Lamb. So the very beginning of the Bible is telling us this is where we're going. We're going to a marriage feast. Never forget that. So that's written into Adam and Eve. So here, that's why I'm saying that you might say, oh, this is all a little bit sort of theoretical. It isn't. It's real. Okay, so verse 4. In order that we might bear fruit for God. For when we were in the realm of the flesh, when we were that old life of ours, the sinful passions aroused by the law were at work in us so that we bore fruit for death. So that old life that we had couldn't make us right with God, couldn't make us married to God. Nothing we did in that old life could make us married to God. It all just ends up in death and condemnation. But now, by dying to what once bound us, we've been released from the law so that we serve in the new way of the Spirit and not the old way of the written code. Are we okay so far? So he's really saying the idea that you can have a set of instructions outside you and that by obeying them you can fix yourself. He's like, no, that's just got to die. If you're going to be married to God, if you're going to be raised up into a living relationship with you, it can't be something outside you, because what's going to fix you on the inside? Because if inside you're still wanting to sin, you still actually want sin, and you're like, I suppose I'd better try and do what's right, but actually you want to do what's wrong. You want to be selfish. It's like, that's no good. That's just death. That's rubbish. That's got to all die. Let's scrap that and start again. Let's have the life of God in us. So that's where we are up to in that. So when he says all that, it sounds quite complicated, but it's not so bad. So instead of serving a temporary system that was preparing for the death of Jesus, we serve him. Okay, now we want to go into this from verse 7, because what he's going to do here, he's going to remember what his life was like before he became a Christian, in a way. So if church life... he's going to go sort of into a deep dive into, some people have called this the psychology of the Christian heart and mind. Why do we feel the way we do? Our old life cannot do what's pleasing to the Lord, and our new life only wants to do what's pleasing to the Lord. How can both of those things exist in one person? Right? Because if I'm still the old me, but I'm now a new me as well, and there's a bit of me that only wants to do what's selfish, say, and then there's another bit of me that cannot do what's wrong. How do both of those things live in one person? So what he's going to do is going to help us to explain that. So from verse 7, what should we say then? Is the law sinful? Because he's said, well, you've got to die to the law, this external description of what's right. So it's like, if we have to die to that law, is it a bad thing? No, certainly not. Nevertheless, I would not have known what sin was had it not been for the law. I'd never really known what coveting really was if the law had said you shall not covet. Now, what about this? This is odd. Now remember, Paul used to be very zealous for the law. He was a Pharisee. He was believed that, if only I can do exactly what the law says, I'll be right with God, I'll work at that. And then in him, he's in there, but he's not got that new life of God. He was just an old kind of human, right? And so what would happen is his old heart, full of the selfishness and the evil desires and the darkness and all of that, and then he's reading the law, and what he finds happens is, it's not that he gets better. I'm starting, I'm actually rescuing myself, I'm fixing myself. He says, no, what my experience really was that what the law would do is point out all the mess that was in me. And he takes an example of, like all the sins, he didn't even know things that he was doing were sinful, say. But he'd read this law of God and he'd go, oh, wow. So that thing I'm doing, that's wrong, right? Oh, wow. I didn't even know that was wrong. What about that? Oh, that's wrong as well. What about that? Yeah, that's wrong. Well, surely this. No, that's wrong. And it's like, by reading this law of God, he found I wasn't getting better. What was happening was, I was like, all the bad things in my life started to get labels on them. Started to get labels. So they go, that thing? Yeah, that's called, that's lusting, that is. Well, but that's totally natural. Yeah, well, you may think so. But that, God calls that lusting. God calls that thieving. God calls that lying. Yeah, but, it's no harm done. There's a white lie, black, all that sort of thing. No, it's lying. It's lying. Doesn't matter what that's lying. That's a lie. Do you see what I mean? That's what Paul found. He found what I discovered was it wasn't curing me of sin, but what it was doing was labeling everything as, and then the law would say, that is a problem, that is a problem, that is a problem, that is a problem, that's another thing wrong. There's something else that you're not right with. And he'd be like, what? This isn't giving me life. This is killing me. It isn't making me feel more alive. It's actually making me feel more dead, reading the law and working. And it's like the harder I'm working at it, the more zealous I am about it, the more I feel like I'm getting killed by it. I mean, I don't know if you've ever experienced that sort of thing, but like when you're not a Christian and you're working so hard that, this year, 2023 is going to be the year I'm going to, and there's loads of YouTubes and things like that. 2023, I'm going to sort myself out completely. I've got these 20 steps to the perfect life, and I'm going to be like the life best version of myself and all that sort of thing. They're great because there's tons of them in the first couple of weeks. And then they kind of trickle away. But even if people keep them up, is it actually making them better? Well, they might be able to run better or eat, but are they better? No. So his flesh had all kinds of desires and activities, and what the law did was kind of slap labels on it all. He uses the example of coveting. If you notice, let's see that. I would not have really known what coveting was if the law had not said, you shall not covet. But sin, seizing the opportunity afforded by the commandment, produced in me every kind of coveting. For apart from the law, sin was dead. So that's this point where he's like, wait, yeah, I wanted stuff that I didn't have. Well, there's nothing wrong with that. Everyone wants that, isn't it? Of course you want stuff. I've got a wish list for stuff for my house, stuff for me personally. I've got all sorts of stuff I want. And the Lord's like, why? What are you doing? Why do you want all this stuff? Why aren't you completely content only in Jesus? What? I'm not content only with Jesus. I want this, and all the stuff he wants. And the Lord's like, yeah, see? Why? And he's like, and coveting's a tough one because, like lying, you go, well, that's like, or stealing or murdering or something. That's easy. That's outside me. Although remember, Jesus does each one of those he goes through and he goes, oh, don't murder. You know what that's really on about, right? You can't even think bad things about people. What? You can't even, well, obviously you think bad things about people, isn't it? You can't help it. And he goes, well, you can't help it in that old humanity. In the old humanity, you think you're good. You say, well, like this, but I can't stand them. So I'm going to do the right thing. I'm going to ignore them. And then that is considered right from in the old humanity. It's like, yeah, well, that's pretty good. Yeah, well done. But that's the law is really like, no. You got to love them. Oh, no, what? Love them? You must be mad. But Jesus goes, we'll come to the coveting in a second, but do you think of Jesus where he's like, you know what, the law is looking at it and you'll think, oh, I'm doing quite well, I've not killed anybody. But he said, no, but pay attention to what the law's doing. It's saying, but what have you said to someone? Did you say, oh, well, call them an idiot or something? That might be the minimum you've called them, actually. You've killed them. You've killed them, effectively. You've just taken away their real identity and given them this worthless one. You've effectively killed them. Whoa. Oh, man, I'm much worse than I realized. Once you accept that and take that seriously, I'm much worse than I realized. Stealing. I've hardly ever, occasionally, maybe a couple of little things, but, it don't matter, or whatever. Or you might even say, no, I've never stolen anything. Never say, what about time? What about affection? Have you stolen that from people? Have you stolen dignity from people? But the law goes through all these such things. There's that particular one, isn't there? And I think I've mentioned it before, but it's I forget the reference. If Jonathan were only here, he'd tell me the reference. I'm powerless without him. But it's that time when it says, when you harvest your fields, you know it, when you harvest your fields, don't go over it like a second time because you might say, oh, well, 10% of the crop's still lying around or something. All right, I'm going to go back over and make sure I get everything. And then it says, no, don't do that. Don't do that, because there's people who need food, and they want to be able to go onto your field and take the stuff that you've missed on your first go through. Then it says, do not steal. We say, well, it's my stuff. Whereas the law's like, no, that belongs to poor people. None of it actually belongs to you. The Lord's like, none of it actually belongs to you. Everything belongs to the Lord. And he's lent stuff to you so that it can get to other people. And if you run your business, say, in such a way that there's nothing there to help people who are in need, you're stealing. That's what the law says. The person's like, whoa. Man, I thought I was all right. But the more I read the law, the worse I feel. It's like everything I've done gets a label of sin, theft, robbery, murder, greed. Yeah? That's what it's like to really read the law. Really read the law. The more zealous, in other words, the more you pay attention to it and understand it, the more you'll realize, man, nearly everything I do is sinful. Yeah, like look at someone lustfully. I remember when we were doing this church plant about 15 years ago, and I had this apprentice at the time helping, and I said, he was invited to go into the local school they were looking at the Sermon on the Mount in the national curriculum or something. And he said, how much should I do that? I said, go in just with because he was trying to work out a full program to get through it all throughout the year. I said, you'll never do it. I said, all you need to do for this term is go in and say, this is what Jesus says. You cannot look at anyone lustfully. That is sinful. That means you'll go to hell. He just said that. And of course, they never moved beyond that the entire term. Because all the kids are like, that's ridiculous. Yeah, that's absolutely insane. How could anyone? And then the whole term was just that one. Then he did, if someone hits you, give them another shot. What? That's just as ridiculous. In fact, that's really bad advice. Then all that, that's it. And then if someone takes something from you, give them someone else. What? They only ever did that for the whole year. Because every week they'd just come back saying, no, look, you can't be. And then he'd just be like explaining, well, listen, honestly, this is why Jesus says that. And that's all they got through. Just because how outrageous are those things that Jesus says. Because he's saying, so pretty much, you're like all your most basic instincts, your natural ways of behaving, sinful. Yeah, sinful. But you can't be sinful. Well, how are we supposed to live then? Yeah, how are you supposed to live if not that? Well, that's why, anyway, so Paul, so when he says coveting, so I'm coveting, because coveting's like something inside. That's why that one's, because the other ones, it's easy in a way to go, well, I haven't killed anyone. I haven't nicked stuff. I haven't committed adultery or whatever. I suppose some might just go, oh, no, I haven't done those things. Coveting, though. Oh, okay, maybe I've done a little bit of that. See, that 10th one is what hits you, isn't it? You go, oh, well, you can't, how are you going to control what you feel like that? Well, on that note, we're going to have our coffee. Okay, so Paul I think he's particularly worried about coveting because I think, you remember that dude who comes to Jesus and says, oh yeah, I've kept all the laws. I haven't killed anyone, I haven't stolen, do you remember that? And then Jesus says, oh yeah, okay, great, love the Lord your God. But in his case, he's like, okay, so what I want you to do, just sell everything you've got and then just come and follow me. In a way, it's the coveting one there that Jesus is touching on. He's like, okay, so if you're keeping all the commandments and you've obviously, you feel confident you've done that. Of course, Jesus could have said, you haven't kept them and pointed that out. But in a sense, he just says, oh, well, let's have a look at number 10. How much do you want stuff? Well, just sell it all, give it away. Oh, no, I can't do that. There we are. You actually haven't kept the commandments. You do want stuff. And that's like, because we're all like, yeah, but what's wrong with that? Well, it's that thing, you remember when Jesus, we've thought about this before. You remember when people bring the will? That example when people bring a will and want Jesus to make sure it's shared out fairly. That's the one where I just keep coming back to because, again, it's a perfectly reasonable request. Jesus, you're super wise. You believe in like justice and people getting their first share of money and stuff. Sure, right? Yeah, right. So can you make sure all the money's shared out fairly? And he's like, no, I don't care. What? Well, surely you've got to care that people get their first share of money. And Jesus is like, why do you want money? What? But like everyone wants money. You've got to have money. Otherwise, what kind of a life can you have if you haven't got money? And he's like, well, I haven't got any. And I'm having a great life, I'm content, I'm joyful in the spirit. And you remember, and he really hasn't got any money because when he has to just come up with a coin, he hasn't even got one. He has to get a fish to give him one, which is crazy, isn't it, that one? He's like, has anyone got a coin? Oh, just hang on, give us that fish. There's a coin. And I was like, what? And I bet they're thinking, I wonder if you could get some more money from the fish. And he's like, yeah, see? That's all you're thinking about. Like, more money out of the fish. Like a chicken or something and keep laying eggs. And he's like, oh, yeah, I could do that. Why don't you? I always find that side of Jesus the most disturbing around the covetousness thing, because he's really saying, yeah, you're not interested in money, right? And then who isn't going to go, yeah, I am actually, yeah. You have to be really set free at a profound level to go, yeah, I'm not interested. Not interested in stuff. And Paul says, doesn't he, in like Philippians, I've learned to be content, so that even if I've got nothing, I'm in prison, no money. And remember what he's got, he doesn't appear to even have hardly any clothes or books or anything, because remember, he writes in one of his letters, he's like, can you ask Timothy to bring me like a spare jumper? He's like, what, dude, you haven't even got a spare jumper? And he has to write a letter from like across the Mediterranean or something to someone who's like, can you just get me a jumper? And you're like, dude, have you not even got a spare jumper? Or whatever it was, and maybe it was a cloak or something. But he's got nothing, absolutely nothing. And yet he's like, I'm totally content. And that letter is all about being absolutely joyful. Rejoice. I'm saying it again. Just be really joyful. And I've got absolutely nothing. And we kind of think, is that real? Is that real? Could you really just have... Because surely everyone says, the politicians, everybody's like, no, if people are going to be happy, live a flourishing life, they've got to have stuff. And it's totally unfair if some people have stuff and other people don't. And all that matrix of that's the way we look at the world. And the way justice means money, stuff. And that, look, they've got loads, we haven't got any, or whatever. All different ways of looking at the world, and it's around stuff. And people imagine Jesus, nearly every politician, no matter where they are on the distribution of stuff, imagines Jesus would agree with them if they're a Christian. In truth, he wouldn't agree with anyone. He'd just be like, why do you want any of that stuff? I don't care. At a deep level, at the deepest level, he's like, I don't care. Or you shouldn't. If you have, what does he say? If you've got enough to eat, you're good to go. Bible says things like that. Just so your wants are incredibly minimum in the Bible. And even pushed, remember Jesus, when he's fasting, he doesn't have anything to eat for 40 days. And then it says he was hungry. Probably. And the worst thing when you're fasting in it is like carbs. Because then you're like, carbs are like the thing. And so the devil goes, do you want some carbs? Look at that stone there. It looks a little bit like a loaf, doesn't it? Could easily be one. I know you could do it. Don't you fancy carbs? Or maybe a bowl of pasta. And of course, it's like, yeah. Well, did he want it? Yeah, I guess. I mean, surely he's hungry. But he's like, he actually recognizes even such a simple desire for a want, for some carbs like that. Yeah, I kind of want that, but what I want more is the life of God. And I would rather die of hunger than miss out on the life of God. And that's what all this is like about. Would you whatever is the thing, anything in life we think, oh no, but to be happy, I want, and what is that thing? I want health. I need health. I can't be happy if I haven't got my health. Can't be happy if I haven't got financial security. Can't be happy if I don't have my relationships right, or intimacy, or this retirement dream, or this holidays, or this job. Can't be happy unless I have this, whatever it is. It's a lie, isn't it, though? It's a lie, because and the worst thing, because sometimes I've had people say to me, that was what I thought. I got that thing, and I am now completely happy and content. that's the most tragic thing. When someone told me that, I was like, oh, how horrible that your soul has become so withered, so shrunken, that such a small thing satisfies it. That's the most tragic thing, because you were designed, your appetites are far too big for you. That's just a fact. Your desires and appetites are way too big for you, every human being. Why? Why have we got such massive desires and appetites? And they should be. We're designed to have them. Why? Because they're designed to feast on the infinite and eternal God. We were designed to not be satisfied with anything less than feeding on the flesh and blood of God, drinking in the living water of infinity. Right? And so that's why we get into such a mess, because we'll go, oh, I can't, we might eat too much. I say nervously, it's just checking my bulging waistcoat. But why do we? I obviously struggle with that, partly because I'm sedentary an awful lot of time writing things, but it's also that because I comfort eat, say. And why do I do that? Because if I can eat this, I will be peaceful, comforted. And of course the living God's like, Paul, you know you won't. You know you won't. You will have a momentary feeling of like, oh, that was nice. But what you really need is me. That's the food. And Jesus says that, doesn't he? He says, why are you laboring so much to just get food that gives you a momentary flicker of life and comfort, and then you're hungry again? He says, why not labor for food that satisfies you utterly? That's what Jesus says, isn't it? That's not me. That's him that says that. And he's looking around at people saying, everyone at some degree is kind of comfort eating. And he's like, don't. Because you need to eat living bread. Me. You've got to eat of me. You've got to drink. Or the woman at the well, and she's got lots of relationships she's had in her life. And he's looking at her and he's like, you're so thirsty. People use that phrase now to mean thirsty for intimacy. Thirsty. And Jesus invented that kind of thing. And he's like, you're thirsty and you have all these different relationships. But they'll never quench your thirst. But if you knew who I am, you would have asked of me. And I'd have given you living water so that you could drink of that and have that thirst quenched forever. Thirst, hunger. The issues of thirst and hunger are all the way through the Bible, but also greed, desire for money, desire for security, all these things. But hunger and thirst, like the very first challenge in the whole Bible in the Garden of Eden for Adam and Eve is about what you're going to eat. What are you going to eat? And then he says, well, that looks good to eat. I'm going to eat it. It's like, oh, don't. So issues like this, what do you want? What do you need? And that's why the coveting, because you're like, why does Paul pick coveting? It's because it gets under. It's the 10th commandment, because it's the one that's digging down under all the others and going, what's going on under all these? What's going on under all these commandments? What is it that you want? Why would you commit adultery, steal, lie, kill, worship God's idols, greed, or why? It's about what do you want? Why are you not satisfied? Why are you not quenched at the deepest level? And so Paul here, he's like saying, well, I was reading the law and I was thinking myself pretty good. I hadn't killed people, I hadn't done this, I hadn't done that. Yeah, I'm like super good on all this stuff, but this one just keeps bothering me. Because this one is saying, aren't you completely satisfied, Paul? Aren't you completely at peace? Haven't you got everything you want? No, I want stuff. I want stuff. And when Jesus confronts the Pharisees, because again, they would have looked very moral, very righteous, and he says, yeah, but you're all actually greedy for money. He actually says that of them. Greedy for money. You just, and they said, what? Like underneath it all, they just kind of got a greed for money, for stuff, for prestige, all those sorts of things. And Paul is feeling the heat of it. This is before he was a Christian, like going right back in. He's saying, apart from, like the law sees the opportunity there in verse 8, afforded by the commandment, and produced me every kind of coveting. Now, what does he mean by that? It produced every kind of coveting. It could mean that he had loads of kinds of coveting in him, and that the law kind of labels them all. So then he says, oh, there's a different kind of coveting, and there's a different kind of coveting, and there's a different kind of coveting. And it's the law's like, he's just able to label them all and recognize them all because the law is pointing out how he is like that. But it could be, and I was talking to Tom about this, it could be, and this is something people maybe, it's that because, like, the very fact of the law pointing this out makes him more sinful. So this might not resonate with you, but some it might. That sometimes I'm talking to a person who is really trying to get to master, like to go, oh, I'm gonna fix this sin in my life. And the more they become obsessed with it and focus on it, the more power it has over them. And they end up falling into it even more. So it's funny, I say funny, utterly tragic, but sometimes you'll hear a public figure who rages against a particular sin or a particular area of life. And how often do we discover they fall into that in horrific levels? How often has that happened? Loads of times. And it can be like to do with sexuality. Often it can do with greed and money. And they're like outwardly, everyone, greed's terrible. And then you discover, oh, well, they've got plenty. And you're like, well, how could you be like, and it's because they like are focused on that, like, this is a bad thing. But they themselves, like, almost because they're focusing on it, it gets power and brings it out of them. It's almost like they become worse at it the more they fixate on it. And so Paul, I think people might be saying that I was so determined to get rid of this like wanting stuff, and I was obsessing about it all the time. I found it just was, I was wanting more. I was getting worse at it, not better at it. That was I think that might have been his experience. And some of us here might be, oh, I've had that experience in different areas of my life. The more I tried to fix myself, and I actually was getting worse, not better. So he says, for apart from the law, sin was dead. Once I was alive, look at verse 9, apart from the law, but when the commandment came, sin sprang to life, and I died. So that's his experience. He's always saying, I can remember once, before I started studying the law, I thought, I am a pretty good person. I'm good. I'm maybe occasionally a couple of bad things, but yeah, I don't really do anyone any harm. You meet people like that all the time. They quite genuinely think they're good. But were they to genuinely start studying the law or the life of Jesus or the Sermon on the Mount or any of these things seriously and engaging with the righteous life of God, they would discover, they'd be like, oh, What? And then sometimes we'll say the Holy Spirit is convicting them. And it's like they're aware of, now they start to become aware that they're not so good and that there is a whole mess. There's a whole mess inside them and in their life in all sorts of areas that they never really confronted and faced up to properly. And Paul says, it's like I felt alive, and then I'm put under this light of this law, this description of God's life. And I felt like I died. I looked to this law and I was like, if I focus on this description of God's right way, I will be able to fix myself. I'll get life. The opposite happened. I actually felt I was dying. So do you remember that's why when Jesus says to those characters in is it John 5, and there he says, look, you guys are into the law, and you think you study the scriptures diligently because you think that in them you have life, but these are the scriptures that testify about me, but you refuse to come to me to have life. Paul would have gone, yeah, I experienced that. I thought I could get life, but it killed me. It made me realize how dead I was. So then Jesus has told us what the right thing to do is, that if instead he should have looked at the law and gone, that law is not, it is exposing how bad I am, but it's actually really telling me about Jesus. And if instead of looking at the law and thinking it's telling me how to fix myself, but if instead that's not what the law was really supposed to do, what the law's really doing was saying, let me tell you about Jesus and how he can give you life. Then, you'll feel, oh man, I'm much worse than I realize I am, but he can give me life. He can fix me. But let's go back to this. So verse 9, once I was alive apart from the law, then when the commandment came, sin sprang to life and I died. I found that the very commandment that was intended to bring life actually brought death. For sin, seizing the opportunity afforded by the command, deceived me, and through the commandment put me to death. There it is. So it says that's feeling that, so the law was really saying, let me preach Jesus to you. And he said, my experience was I looked at that and made it about myself, and sin was like saying, you could fix yourself. You could fix yourself if you try harder. And he throws himself into that. And it's like, it deceived me. It's actually killed me. I'm now more depressed and overwhelmed and incapacitated than I ever was. It's made me, I feel guilty. I feel ashamed. All those things. What sin does is say, you're not so bad. If you try harder, you could get life. It's just near. It's like that thing when a person says, if they're gambling and it's like, you're just about to get lucky. Honestly, just keep going. Another 10 minutes and it's going to go your way. That's like sin is really. It's like, no, just keep trying. You're going to fix yourself this time. And sin deceives us and it actually kills us. Like that. So that's what his experience was. So then, verse 12, the law is holy, the commandment is holy, righteous, and good. There's nothing wrong with the law. That's good. It's telling us about Jesus. It's revealing. It's this sort of multimedia presentation of who Jesus is, what he's going to do to save, the righteous way of God. That's what the law is. But, verse 13, did that which is good then become death to me? So it's good, but it sort of killed me. How's that? Well, it's not the law's fault. He says, nevertheless, in order that sin might be recognized as sin, this is a complicated sentence, but listen, just let's read it and then I'll explain it. In order that sin might be recognized as sin, it used what is good to bring about my death, so that through the commandment, sin might become utterly sinful. He's something like this. I think he's saying something like this. He's saying, the law's really good. It's this wonderful multimedia presentation of Jesus, life, salvation, righteousness. And what could go wrong with that? But sin is so bad that even something as great as that, it turns it into something bad. Something, it makes it, because we're sinful and messed up deep down, we look at that and we say, oh, well, that's about me and me fixing myself. And suddenly what was supposed to be a good thing and only like, oh, this will make you believe in Jesus, it goes, no, it actually turns me in on myself. This said Paul's experience. It says, sin is so bad that even something good, it'll use something that's intended for good and kill you with it. Sin's like that. And why that's an important message to learn. That's true of everything in life. All the good things in life that God gives, they're all loads of good things. Sin ruins all of them. That's how bad sin is. Even the best things that God has to give, and he'll give you, bless you, sin can take every one of those and use it to kill you. So it might be like the food one. Oh yeah, food's a good thing. Sin's like either eat too much or have diet problems, you become obsessed with it. Whatever happens, sin will try to make that good blessing into something bad that will kill you and destroy you and take away your life. Or it can be money, house, family, anything that's a good that God can give. Sin can make that into a bad thing, an idol, or something corrupt. That's how bad. So he says that tells you that sin might become utterly sinful. That you might say, oh, well, sin's, how bad is it? It's so bad that every good thing that God has to give, sin will ruin it. Every good thing, sin will ruin it and make it into something bad. So even like Jesus, he said, oh, well, they won't. Surely if I give Jesus to this sinful world, my own eternal, wonderful, wonderful son, surely nothing can go wrong with that. Oh, yeah, we'll kill him. We'll kill him. Yeah. Yeah, that's how bad sin is. There is nothing that sin will not wreck. Nothing. So, verse 14, so then Paul's like looking back on his life and saying, that was my kind of experience, that there's this law that was intended just to preach Jesus and give me life, but because I was just that old kind of life, that old kind of human life, I looked at it and it just wrecked me. It just wrecked me, trying to fix myself, live up to it. I was full of guilt, shame. I actually was dying, not living. And then, so he says, so the law's like a spiritual thing. The law's like a good thing. That's all spiritual. But I'm not in myself, like old life. My old life isn't spiritual, and we'll wreck it. So there we have verse 14. The law's spiritual, but I, that old me, unspiritual, slave to sin. Now, what he's going to do now, you'll notice he's starting to talk in the present tense. Now, this is the bit, and I know I've left it to the very end, and so he's like, oh, you've done that so you don't have to cover it. No. Maybe, but no, it's this. I'll have to just summarize it. He's saying this. Right, so I have this old human life. That was my experience before I met Jesus, and it was like that. But now I have met Jesus, and I've got this new life in me, And I've got this new humanity in me. And so now I can, I'm just looking to Jesus for life. I really want to do what's right now. And I have this new life in me that rejoices in the righteousness of God and loves to do what's right and doesn't resent it and is content in the life of God. And when I'm really in that new humanity, I can genuinely say, I don't want any money. I don't want anything. I just want Jesus. You can experience that sometimes, can't you? When you're really in worship or something and you're having a really wonderful time with Jesus, and you honestly, in your deepest part of you, just like, I don't care if everything is taken from me right now. I don't want anything other than Jesus. And that's the real cry of the depths of you, right? That's what it is to have that new nature, that new life that really is completely satisfied in him and just has love for people and can forgive everything and all this. All of it can happen from that new humanity. So we have that, but he's like, but I still have that old humanity living next to me. And both things at the moment. Because there's it's like as if there's the old life, and then there's this new life, and it's like there will be a time when Jesus returns, there's only that new life forever and ever. The resurrection life will be the only life forever and ever. And then there's that old life, that's with all the problems with that. But you, if you're a Christian, you kind of live in both worlds at once. So in the past, before you became a Christian, you only knew that old humanity. And it might have been that you were quite content with sin. You're like, yeah, it doesn't bother me particularly. Now it does. Now it does, because your old humanity might be like, yeah, I quite like living worldly ways, but your new humanity doesn't, and hates it. So you can find in yourself, it's almost like there's two of you, and you'll be like living according to one or living according to the other, and you can find yourself utterly conflicted. It's like you're at war within yourself at times. Have you ever experienced that? And you're like, why did I hate that? Why did I do it? I hate that. And I want to do this. Why don't I just do this all the time? Right? Because you're wondering, I want to just live according to that new humanity. I want to walk in step with the Spirit. I don't want to walk according to the flesh. But you find yourself doing it. And Paul actually, in this section, he even has this bit where he's like, I'm doing the things I don't want to do. And then because I'm doing the things I don't want to do, it's like not even me doing them. It's like another person in me is doing it. And he's like feels like he's two people. Like he's got this old humanity. And he's like, and when he uses the word I, this is why this is confusing. He uses like, I can't do it. I keep sinning. I don't keep sinning. And you're like, well, who are you? And he's like, I'm kind of both of these things, but I don't want to be that me anymore. I only want to be this me. And there's a bit like in Galatians 2, 19 to 20, when he says, I have been crucified with Christ, and I no longer live. Right? So you'd say, I have been crucified with Christ. I no longer live. And then he says, the life I now live, well, hang on, you've dead. He goes, oh yeah, that's the other me. But the life that I now live, I live in the body. I live by faith in the Son of God who loved me and gave himself for me. So he's like, I've died, I'm alive. Both at the same time. That's what's going on in chapter 7. I know I've run out of time, and it's like, but I'll get. And so he's experiencing this desire. He's like, look, all right, let me just read it. Verse 16. If I do what I don't want to do, I agree that the law is good. So he's like, this righteous description, it's like, that's right. And when I've done something wrong, I'm like, yeah, that's right. I'm wrong. That's a wrong thing. I wish I'd not done it. As it is, it's no longer I myself who do it, but sin living in me. Can you see? It's like it's not even me anymore. He feels that conflicted, that there's two human lives going on within him. And that one is kind of dead. And he's like, I want to think of that as dead. I want to be free from it. And then by the time he gets to the end of this chapter, it's as if he feels like it's a dead person clinging on to him. And he's like, get off me. Get off. I don't even want you clinging on me anymore, you dead human. I want to escape that dead human who's clinging on to me, and I want to just be the living human, the new humanity of Jesus. Get off me. Like at the end, he's like, and you're like, he never says that. No, he does. Look, go from verse 21. I find this principle at work. Although I want to do good, evil's right there with me. For in my inner being, I delight in God's law, but I see this other law at work in me, waging war against the law of my mind and making me a prisoner. What a wretched man I am. Who will rescue me from this body that is subject to death? Well, it's like this body of death. It's like I feel as if there's this body of death on me. And I'm going to get off. I've got to get rid of that. Now, although it sounds really complicated, this Romans 7, I think if you're a believer, you'll go, yeah, that is exactly what it's like to live the Christian life. Exactly what it's like to feel this terrible conflict. And I always say this, the most miserable person in the world is always a Christian who is slipped into living according to the flesh. So they've got that new humanity, they've got it. But what they're doing is walking according to the flesh, that old humanity. They are always the most utterly, wretchedly miserable because they can't enjoy that life anymore. They used to go, I loved that. I used to love doing that stuff. Yeah, you once did. You can't now. Now it will make you feel sick and utterly depressed to do the things that once you enjoyed that, now it's soul destroying for you. Yeah? They're the most miserable person in all the world because they can't do it anymore. Because that old humanity, now it's like you want in the driving seat, you want the new humanity, the life according to the Spirit. If you want more on this, you could read Galatians chapter 5 when Paul's like saying, so how are you supposed to know what is the life of the flesh and what is the life of the Spirit? And he actually sort of goes, hey, look, the life of the flesh is pretty obvious. It's all that stuff, selfishness, bitterness, slander, immorality, greed. It's all that stuff. When you're into that stuff, that's the old humanity stuff. That's gonna wreck you. Wreck you. What's life in the Spirit like? Oh, well, joy, peace, holiness, goodness, kindness, self-control. It's that stuff. And that like walking according to one or the other. Or sometimes the metaphor that Christians have used is the idea that you're feeding one or you're feeding the other. Are you like, when Paul says, don't make plans to live according to the flesh kind of thing. Don't make provision for that. Because if you're saying, I'm going to indulge this, my old humanity, he says, don't be doing that. You want to be like killing it, not feeding it. Because if you feed it, he'll get more control of it. He's always warned us, whoever you give yourself to obey, that's your master. That should not be your master. It hasn't any power over you, that old thing. Don't make provision for it. Don't feed it. Don't think about the stuff that old humanity likes. Just like, no, I'm not going to give you any ammo. I'm going to starve you. Get off. I'm not going to give you any food. I'm killing you. I'm killing you. I won't want you alive 1 minute longer. And then the new humanity, like they use this metaphor about like milk given to a newborn. Study the word of God. That's used in the Bible. As if it's like the Bible's telling you can feed and strengthen that new humanity. And it's like, because when you first become born again, you're like, oh, it's like a little baby. Right, give it milk and then, stronger food. And then the Bible's telling you how to do it. Study the Bible, pray, get together with other Christians, worship the living God. But particularly the Bible, that's the one that's particularly said is like pure milk, like for a newborn. Isn't that powerful, though? If you're a real Christian, you go, Romans 7, wow, that helps me to understand why my life is the way it is and what I should do about it. But a person who isn't a Christian at all goes, that's just weird. That's just weird. Shall I just pray cheekily? And then, I know I'm over time, but Heavenly Father, we feel this sense of, I want to get free from that old humanity. It's rubbish. It's wretched. Who can deliver me? Thanks be to God. Romans 7:25. Who delivers me? Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Heavenly Father, we're looking forward to that, getting into Romans chapter 8 and seeing more about this new humanity life. But we're feeling just that way that the scriptures explain what it is to live in two worlds, with two human lives within us, or between the times, as people sometimes describe it. We're caught up in the future, but also the past. Heavenly Father, we don't want to live according to the flesh. We want to live according to the Spirit. We don't want to be stuck in Adam. We want to be alive in Christ. We pray that this chapter, even if I've made it sounds more complicated there, pray, Lord, may the Spirit shine the light of this chapter into our lives and give us, make us more determined than ever. Show us the wisdom of how to feed the new humanity and starve the old. Heavenly Father, we want to live holy lives that are pleasing to you. In Jesus' name, amen.